You're watching the History Fella channel. In this video we'll be looking at the Siege of Yorktown of 1862. The Battle of Yorktown, or Siege of Yorktown, was fought from April the 5th to May the 4th, 1862, as part of the Peninsula Campaign of the American Civil War. Marching from Fort Monroe, Union Major General George B. McClellan's Army of the Potomac encountered Major General John B. Magruder's small Confederate force at Yorktown behind the Warwick Line. McClellan suspended his march up the peninsula towards Richmond and settled in for siege operations. On April the 5th, the 4th Corps of Brigadier General Erasmus D. Keyes made initial contact with Confederate defensive works at Lee's Mill, an area McClellan expected to move through without resistance. Magruder's ostentatious movements of troops back and forth convinced the Union that this works was strongly held. As the two armies fought an artillery duel, reconnaissance indicated to Keyes the strength and breadth of the Confederate fortifications, and he advised McClellan against assaulting them. McClellan ordered the construction of siege fortifications and brought his heavy siege guns to the front. In the meantime, General Joseph E. Johnston brought reinforcements from Magruder. On April 16th, Union forces probed a point in the Confederate line at Dam No. 1. The Union failed to exploit the initial success of this attack, however. This lost opportunity held up McClellan for an additional 2 weeks, while he tried to convince the U.S. Navy to bypass the Confederates' big guns at Yorktown and Gloucester Point, ascend the York River to West Point, and outflank the Warwick Line. McClellan planned a massive bombardment for dawn on May the 5th, but the Confederate army slipped away during the night of May the 3rd towards Williamsburg. The battle took place near the site of the 1781 Siege of Yorktown. McClellan had chosen to approach the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, with an amphibious operation that landed troops on the tip of the Virginia Peninsula at Fort Monroe. His Army of the Potomac numbered 121,000 men, transported starting on March the 17th by 389 vessels. McClellan planned to use the U.S. Navy forces to envelop Yorktown, but the emergence of the Confederate ironclad CSS Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads disrupted this plan. The threat of the Virginia on the James River and the heavy Confederate batteries at the mouth of the York River prevented the Navy from assuring McClellan that they could control either the York or the James, so he settled on a purely land approach towards Yorktown. The Confederate defenders of Yorktown, led by Major General John B. Magruder, initially numbered only 11,000 to 13,000 men. The rest of the Confederate forces, under the overall command of General Joseph E. Johnston, remained spread out across eastern Virginia at Culpeper, Fredericksburg, and Norfolk. Magruder constructed a defensive line from Yorktown to the York River, behind the Warwick River to Mulberry Point on the James River, to effectively block the full width of the peninsula. Although he could adequately man none of the defensive works at the time, this became known as the Warwick Line. McClellan's plan called for Major General Samuel P. Heintzelman and his 3rd Corps to fix the Confederate troops in their trenches near the York River, while the 4th Corps, under Brigadier General Erasmus D. Keyes, enveloped the Confederate right and cut off their lines of communication. McClellan and his staff, ignorant of the extent of Magruder's line, assumed the Confederates had concentrated only in the immediate vicinity of Yorktown. On April 4, 1862, the Union Army pushed through Magruder's initial line of defense, but the following day encountered his more effective Warwick Line. The nature of the terrain made it difficult to determine the exact disposition of the Confederate forces. McClellan estimated that the Confederates had 15,000 to 18,000 troops in the defensive line. Accounts by Magruder's soldiers indicate he marched his troops back and forth throughout his lines as a ruse to make his forces look stronger. This morning we were called out by the long roll and have been travelling most of the day, seeming with no other view than to show ourselves to the enemy at as many different points in the line as possible. A Louisiana soldier recorded in his diary. Magruder's own reports, however, did not mention this. Word of Magruder's deception reached Richmond nevertheless, with Mary Chesant noting in her diary, "It was a wonderful thing how he played his 10,000 men before McClellan like fireflies and utterly deluded him." On the 6th and 7th of April, McClellan estimated that 30,000 troops were at Yorktown. Troops continued to arrive on the 20th of April. McClellan's estimated more than 80,000 were at Yorktown. McClellan had 5 divisions available and advanced in 2 columns. The 4th Corps of 2 divisions under Keyes advanced towards Lee's Mill, whilst the 3rd Corps of 2 divisions under Heintzelman advanced towards Yorktown proper. He kept his last division, Sedgwick, in reserve to commit to either column. The lead division of Keyes' corps, under Brigadier General W.F. Smith, contacted the position at Lee's Mill in the early afternoon of the 5th. Smith had 2 brigades, Davidson and Hancock, and a battery, which was Wheeler's, to hand and attempt to suppress the superior enemy artillery. He lost the firefight, and despite an order from McClellan to Keyes to attack with all force, if only with the bayonet, Smith withdrew back to Warwick Court House. The 3rd Corps advanced directly towards Yorktown, but were stopped by heavy artillery fire. That evening, McClellan ordered 2 brigades to march across the entire frontage of the enemy line. The next day, April the 6th, Hancock and Burns took their parts in the brigades and marched across the entire frontage to provoke enemy fire. Hancock took the 6th Maine Infantry and 5th Wisconsin Infantry left to right, and Burns went right to left. This proved that there was no break in the river that could easily be assaulted. That evening a major storm started and shut down all troop movements until the 10th. Further recess was ordered in order to find a weak point to attack, and on April the 9th Hancock performed a reconnaissance around Dam No. 1, where Magruder had widened the Warwick to create a water obstacle nearby. The rebel picket line was along the Garrow Ridge on the eastern side of the river. Hancock drove off the Confederate pickets and took some prisoners. Smith and the attached engineer, Comstock, noted this was the only place along the river where the ground was higher on the eastern bank than the western, and hence was vulnerable. McClellan chided Smith for not taking an opportunity to attack, stating, "If you'd gone and succeeded, you would have been a major general." Hancock considered this area a weak spot in the line, but his messenger was captured by the rebels en route to Smith's HQ. Keyes believed that the Warwick Line fortifications could not be carried out by an assault, and so informed McClellan. During this phase, Union Army Balloon Corps aeronaut Professor Thaddeus S.C. Lowe used 2 balloons, the Constitution and the Intrepid, to perform aerial observation. On April the 11th, Intrepid carried Brigadier General Fitz John Porter, a division commander of the 5th Corps, was aloft, but unexpected winds sent the balloon over enemy lines, causing great consternation in the Union command before other winds returned them to safety. Confederate Captain John Bryan suffered a similar wind mishap in a hot air balloon over the Yorktown lines. It was to the amazement of the Confederates who had estimated the Union strength at 200,000, 4 times the real number, and the dismay of President Abraham Lincoln that McClellan did not attack immediately. McClellan wished to either turn the position with an amphibious movement or find a weak point where an assault stood a reasonable chance of success. The Navy refused to cooperate, but on the 14th of April, McClellan's chief engineer, John G. Barnard, finally reported that a weak point had been found at Dam No. 1, located on the Warwick River. McClellan developed a plan of attack at that point. Initially, a division, Smith's, would seize and occupy Garrow Ridge overlooking the dams. This would prevent the rebels from conducting further work on the fort. They would build in a river's edge and prevent rebel scouts from finding the assembling assault forces. He would then assemble a large force behind the ridge and assault the rebel fortifications. On April the 15th, orders were sent to Smith to occupy Garrow Ridge and probe the rebel fortifications to see whether there was any clearing in the woods behind the crossing. All the uncommitted units, Casey's division, Richard's division, and Henry Nergley's brigade, were ordered to assemble ready to assault in the following days. Smith's operation, which took place on April the 16th, was a debacle. Initially wildly successful in seizing the Garrow Ridge and advancing a small force to drive off the rebels, McClellan considered the task to be completed and returned to his HQ to arrange for the assaulting units to move into position. Smith then decided to advance a small force of Vermonters across the dam against his orders. They were rapidly pinned down as the Brigadier General Howell Cobb's brigade, supported by 2 others, came down on this small force and were driven back. In the process, they collapsed the dam and destroyed the crossing point. This rendered the planned assault impossible. Smith faced a severe criticism for his failure and was the subject of a witch hunt by the Vermont senator. Drummer Julian Scott, along with First Sergeant Edward Holton and Captain Samuel E. Pingree, were awarded the Medal of Honor for their heroism at Dam No. 1. On the morning of April 17th, it became obvious that no assault could be attempted at any point. At this point, McClellan acquiesced to conducting regular approaches and ordered parallels to be dug for heavy artillery. The siege preparations at Yorktown consisted of 15 batteries with more than 70 heavy guns, including 200-pounder Parrots and 12 100-pounder Parrots, with the rest of the rifle pieces divided between 20-pounder and 30-pounder Parrots and 4.5-inch Rodman siege rifles. These were augmented by 41 mortars, ranging in size from 8 inches to 13 inches, which weighed over 10 tons and fired shells weighing 220 pounds. When fired in union, these batteries could deliver over 7,000 pounds of ordnance onto the enemy positions with each volley. McClellan had not given up hope, though, of turning Yorktown. The commander of the York River Flotilla, Missouri, had consistently refused to even approach the Yorktown batteries, citing the weakness of his ship. However, on the 16th of April, the USS Sebago joined the flotilla, and her captain promptly reported Missouri's cowardice. Missouri attempted to delay further by stating he'd only attack Yorktown if the opposite fortress at Gloucester Point was destroyed first. McClellan gave him the newly arrived division of Franklin as a landing force, but Missouri kept finding reasons not to land them. Finally, on the 30th of April, Missouri was relieved and replaced by Commander William Smith. Smith promptly closed with the Yorktown batteries and bombarded them. This would precipitate Johnston's retreat. For the remainder of April, the Confederates, now circa 72,000 people, effectively and under the direct command of Johnston, improved their defences while McClellan undertook the laborious process of transporting and placing massive siege artillery batteries, which he planned to deploy on May the 5th. This would be followed by an assault by 6 divisions against the divide, a fortified line containing 2 forts named the Red Redoubt and the White Redoubt, linked by a continual trench line between the head of the Warwick and the main fortress at Yorktown. To Johnston, the naval bombardment of the 30th of April and the initial federal bombardment by the siege guns on the 1st of May were a signal that time was up. Johnston sent his supply train in the direction of Richmond on May the 3rd. That evening, the rebels expanded as much ordnance as possible to discourage pursuit, and when the last rebel infantry was clear, leaving booby traps and landmines in their works, the gunners set long fuses on the remaining powder and joined the retreat. Sometime after midnight on the 4th of May, 2 escaped slaves approached Hancock's brigade. They said the rebels were withdrawing. Hancock sent this message to Smith, who was woken up at 2 a.m. with this information, which he was followed immediately by Lieutenant George Custer, reporting he'd seen the same from a balloon. Still groggy, Smith sent the messenger up the Keys and ordered the pickets to investigate at dawn. Custer was not satisfied with this and rode forward to Brooks's Vermont brigade and told him. He immediately woke his brigade and sent them in place to make a dawn attack at 5:30. The Vermonters seized the fortifications they'd been repelled by on the 16th of April. Keyes' message apparently did not arrive until well into the morning. Meanwhile, sometime between 3:15 and 4 a.m., General Jamestown, the general of the trenches for the day, was informed that there were explosions in Yorktown and picket firing. He woke General Porter, the director of the siege, with this information. Porter looked through at Yorktown and dismissed the rumour that the rebels were retreating. However, at 4:30, 3 rebel soldiers surrendered to the Federals and were brought to Jamestown. He went back to Porter, who at this time accepted the information, ordering that the reconnaissances be immediately sent out for several regiments to occupy Yorktown at dawn. At 5:30, the news reached McClellan's HQ. Awoken by the news, he had then telegraphed Sumner, Smith, and Porter to push forward and ascertain the truth of the matter. Other news soon came in, and McClellan ordered a general pursuit. He sent cavalry under Brigadier General George Stoneman in pursuit and ordered Brigadier General William B. McFranklin's division to reboard Navy transports, sail up the York River, and cut off Johnston's retreat. The stage was set for the subsequent Battle of Williamsburg and the Battle of Eltham's Landing. If you found the information in this video helpful or informative, please feel free to give the video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. I thank you very much for watching and listening to this video.